Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. We have a great show ahead for you guys. We will be starting off with what feels like the first time in forever. I'm going to be talking about an actual basketball game being played tomorrow night. Yes, the Celtics and the Mavs open the NBA Finals tomorrow night at TD Garden. I'm going to give you my betting and fantasy preview there. Then I'm going to rank my top 10. For the first time, these rankings are based off of my own opinion as to who you should roster in terms of daily fantasy basketball and hockey. So for both finals, I will have you set with the top 10 players who I think will be your best options to roster for your DFS squads. And then I'm also going to reintroduce soccer to the podcast, where I'm going to be looking at the upcoming Copa America tournament, specifically the betting favorites that will take place right here in the US of A. And stick around where I continue to update you guys on what the finals MVP betting odds look like. They have stayed the same for pretty much the entire week, but I still want to go over them again, just if you are curious about them. But before we begin today's show, I always ask that you like, follow, and subscribe to the show. We also do receive a lot of different tips. So please leave at the link gsmc.cloud any tip or donation if you do feel so inclined. It is a huge support to the network, both me and my fellow podcasters, so anything you give is greatly appreciated by all. Now, let's get right into today's show. Like I said before, we are going to start off with a very exciting segment. It feels like the first time in forever, like I said. I am going to be talking about a finals game in the NBA. The Celtics and the Mavs are going to kick things off Thursday night, tomorrow night, 8:30 Eastern Time. Should be a good one. It should be a great game one. As we saw with both teams, they played fantastic games one in the conference finals. I hope it carries over to the NBA finals. Now, looking at the betting odds for tomorrow's game. Boston is giving 6.5 points at home to Dallas. The over-under is 214.5, which in my opinion is a little bit low for two very high-scoring teams. Moving over to the fantasy side of things. These players are going to be very pricey because of there's only one series, and these are the cream of the crops in terms of superstar players and storylines. Starting off with the two most scrutinized players in this finals, and that is Luka and JT. Starting off with Luka tomorrow night on DraftKings. He is going to be valued at 13.6K. Pretty pricey for him, but he is valued at a 58.8 fantasy points. Not too shabby projection there. And turning over to Jayson Tatum, he is projected to go for 11.8K and 56.3 fantasy points there. So as you can see, both of these stars weighed very heavily in terms of fantasy. I think that they are the proponents for both of these squads. They are the two betting favorites right now for Finals MVP. I'll get into that later. But these two are the standard in terms of daily fantasy basketball. If you are willing to bust your budget a little bit and go for the fences and swing for the fences, these are the two guys, the two superstars, the two most focused on figures in this particular series that you should swing for in daily fantasy basketball. Now, getting into kind of the stars that are going to need to step up, or two players that are going under the radar, so to speak. Obviously, one is going to be Kristaps Porzingis for me. He is returning from injury, and when he is with the Celtics and healthy, they are a much different team. They are tougher to defend. He brings a volatility to the offense that is unmatched in all of basketball, as we saw in the regular season. So, Kristaps Porzingis tonight, he is going for 8.2K on the market, and he's projected to have 40.8 fantasy points. A little bit lofty for someone coming back from an injury, so we'll have to see how he translates to real game action. I think that Mazzulla will limit some of his minutes, so I do not think he will hit that fantasy projection. But on the Mavs side of things, there are a myriad number of options for the Mavs because they really are a team-centric team. It is not focused on Luka and Kyrie all the time, and so I'm very confident to think that a role player will step up and assume a mantle as the third option on this Dallas Mavericks team. And tonight, I think it is going to be PJ Washington, a guy who we haven't really talked about that much on this podcast. He was a key acquisition from the Charlotte Hornets for this Dallas Mavericks squad, who was looking to make some noise to even get into that 5th seed in the Western Conference. They were sitting right around the wild card, and after PJ Washington was acquired, they were able to ascend further up the ranks of the Western Conference, and he is a huge reason as to why they are now in the NBA Finals with a real shot at shocking the world and beating these Celtics. So, even though tonight he's only projected at 6.4K, so he's not necessarily a huge budget buster for you there. He is only projected to have 24.5 fantasy points. Obviously not a lofty amount, but still a solid amount if you're looking for that utility guy, that glue guy. He also is very effective in terms of defensive standings. So if you're looking for someone who can get you a couple critical points in terms of defensive stats, look out for PJ Washington. And also, the thing about Dallas is they are also a very high three-point shooting team. And PJ Washington, that is one area he has kind of lacked in his run with Dallas these past couple of months. So should he elevate his three-point shooting percentage, he becomes one of the most dangerous players in this final series. And I really do think that ultimately PJ Washington, as you will see later on in the show when I go over my top 10 most important fantasy pieces for both this series and the Stanley Cup, we will see that PJ Washington does make an entry on that list, and I'm really looking forward to see how he handles certain matchups and just seeing how this whole Mavs game plan comes together. Now, getting on to more of the preview side of things. Obviously, Boston deserves to be the favorite because they have been the favorite all year. The team that many expected to come out of the Eastern Conference, but I still think this is kind of a high spread for them, and it feels weird saying that, but ultimately I think that the Pacers showed that Boston can be played very closely, and it's up to their opposition to kind of push themselves over that edge, because obviously Boston is much better than they were in previous years at coming back from large deficits, as we saw multiple times in the Pacers series. And so that is the Dallas challenge. But in my ultimate opinion, in tonight's game, Boston will not cover the spread. I think this is going to be one of those games where Boston gets out to an early lead. They're going to have a lot of momentum coming out. They want to kind of impress the home fans, something that they haven't really done over these past couple of postseasons. And then Dallas will begin to claw their way back into the game. They're going to find Luka and Kyrie more often. They're going to integrate more of their role players. It's going to be a very back and forth kind of game. These are two very high scoring teams. I ultimately think this will hit the over. So do take the over, but take Boston to not cover. Take the Mavs to cover, in fact. I think this is going to be something like a 3 to 4 point game. I think ultimately Boston pulls it out in the end, just because of the fact that I'm really intrigued to see how Kristaps Porzingis matches up defensively with guys like Dan Gafford and Derek Lively, who we'll mention later in the show. But I really do think that Boston, right now, they had more rest. They have the experience of being here. Luka and Kyrie definitely does have the experience, and he definitely wants to beat his former team. But Luka, this is his first NBA Finals. This is his first true test. Ultimately, though, Boston will be more scrutinized going forward because this is like not their first rodeo, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on them from different pundits and different sports talk radio shows, and it's going to be a lot of pressure on them. But I think they're better prepared to handle it due to the fact that they have the depth now. They have the role players that they need to elevate this team to a title, and so I think that Boston steals game one. I don't expect them to cover. I do expect it to hit the over. So I'm really, really, really hyped for tomorrow's game. I hope y'all are too. It has been a long time coming. It feels like we finally get basketball after what felt like a year before this NBA Finals happens, so I'm really excited to tune in and see how this goes. But that should just about do it for the first segment of today's show. Coming up next, like I said before, we're going to be looking at the most important players in both finals in terms of fantasy, and this is the first time that my personal opinion comes into play when I rank these players, so it should be a great segment. You don't want to miss out. We will be right back on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind.